All right, database sharding group. So follow-up items, Alberto, thanks for feedback on the capacity planning. And
I can explain very quickly. So
sure.
there's actually a couple of issues there. So one of them is going to be led by Jerry and Jose. So they're going to try to come up with some quick conclusions based off all of the information, all of the the efforts that we've carried out on the database for the last couple of years, and summarize a good chunk of a good amount of that, and put in an issue by the end of the week or so. So there we're going to see some conclusions around the capacity of the database, and then potential walls that we might be hitting during the next months. And then that's point number 2 actually. So point number 1 highlighted there, the capacity assessment for our main production DB cluster. That will entail a bit of a more kind of detailed and fine-grained approach to we're going to be testing, going to be stressing our testing database, and we'll have conclusions in a couple of months, I think, that should complete the other issue, the issue that we'll have ready by the end of this week. So it's a combination of a short-term and a mid-term issue, couple of issues.
Okay. Then I will.
When that new issue comes out, can you add it back to the stock for reference?
Yeah, so that Jose is working on that, and Jerry. So I'll see if I can add it in a couple of hours or so.
Sure thing. Thanks. Appreciate it.
No worries.
Thank you. All right, I'll move on to the next section then. So as far as what's been done since last week, there were a bunch of questions about progress of like capturing table size was one of the questions, some of our assumptions around namespace sharding. And it turns out we all realized there's a lot of scattered information. So I updated the sharding epic to consolidate a lot of the work that's been done so far, some of the assumptions, and just tried to make it more representative of what we're working on right now. So y'all can read that. As far as what else has been done, there were some design changes that came out of discussions on our audit log partitioning efforts that we're undertaking right now. Andreas, anything noteworthy to call out on this one?
Sorry, which one? I was just reading something else.
Database design changes.
No, we settled on a target design for the audit log, and we ran that by the backend group owning the feature, and we sort of agreed on the design. So that's good.
Okay. Giannis is working on a script to generate some test audit events data while we're still working with the right folks to figure out what we can use for test data, whether or not we can continue to use production data for test data. So Giannis is creating a way for us to generate a large volume of just generic test data. There was also, as part of the questions about namespace sharding, a repeated question came up: are there any use cases out there for sharding and scaling a production database in the way that we're exploring? So we started an issue to try and look for some of those use cases out in the wild, and we haven't found any yet. So if anybody has any useful information where scaling a production database using native Postgres with foreign data wrappers, feel free to add it to that list, to that issue link here. Andreas, you have the next item.
Yeah, so this is remotely related to sharding in a sense that I think those are the things that we should also be doing. And this is about analyzing our workload and actually understanding that better. So for a while, we didn't have reporting on that end, and that came back today, I think. And it was very easy to see that there is only one query that eats 40% of the total database time on all the replicas in the cluster, which is really a lot if you think about it. And that's been around for at least 2 weeks. I'm still figuring out when it was introduced. And it didn't impact much on the database health. At least we're not aware of it. So I like to think that's a good sign as well. And it was easy to fix, and it's really just fixing an index or fixing the query. So very simple fix for that. And I would just like to encourage us to do more in that direction, like analyze the workload that we have and find those fixes, because this is really low-hanging fruits. And ultimately, I think even if we had a sharding solution, if we keep doing the wrong things in that environment, it's perhaps even going to be worse than today. So we have to do these things anyways. I think this is important. There is a great reporting tool that we're using, the Postgres checkup tool, and it still looks like it's working again, but the primary database instance is not included in the reporting. I created an issue today for that. It would be great if you can fix that. I think it's just a configuration setting, but that's definitely interesting to look at.
Just to kind of like emphasize Andreas's point, like we had like a lot of squeeze on PG Bouncer, and we were taking a look and we discovered one background job that was consuming, like pretty unimportant job that was consuming about 50% of our PG Bouncer connections. And just by fixing that, we effectively doubled the capacity. And so there's a huge amount of optimization that we can do that'll just give us tons of headroom.
Right. So going back to the original goals for this working group was database scalability. And there's been a singular focus on sharding for some time in this working group, but there are lots of other things like this that we can call out that will help with our database scalability. So thank you, Andreas and Andrew, for bringing those up. Any other questions on that bullet point? All right, on to the next. So it was a week or a week and a half ago that Andreas put together an issue to track where we would break if we implemented namespace sharding, and by break in the form of timeouts on SQL database, right? If you do a query that does not use the partitioning or sharding key, it's going to take forever. And there was a really good we started with a table on features that would break if we went with namespace sharding. And the list is started here. And then at the end, Andrew did a query across our database. Andrew, you want to kind of go over that real quick?
Yeah, it's pretty sort of, like the first point is that it's very optimistic. So what it's saying is that it's kind of looking for the most difficult tables. And then, so there's about 350 tables in the database. And basically I'm excluding most of those and I'm looking at the most difficult ones. And there's about 88 in that group, but we could probably cut a few of them out. But what's left is the things that have got no connection to a shard to a namespace in any way. So, that's your users, all your geodata, obviously, as well. But there's a whole bunch of tables in. And basically what I did was I started off with all the tables and I said, well, things like namespace and project are obviously shardable by namespace, which is actually a very optimistic assumption to make, but like we'll start with that. And then everything that's connected to that through a foreign key, we'll just assume is also shardable by namespace. Again, that's a very optimistic assumption. And if you go through that, you end up with about 88 tables that are not shardable by namespace because they have no relationship to a namespace. And so that would be kind of where you need to start that discussion. And then if you look across those relationships, there's about 80 or 90 relationships to, sorry, I've actually just put it in this other document. There's about 90.
Want to just share your screen, Andrew?
Sure. Sorry, I was just gonna, I'll share my screen, yeah. Sorry, I wasn't prepared.
Sorry, put you on the spot.
No, it's cool. I think I misspelled eligibility there as well. So, I mean, you can kind of look through it. There's basically like all the database tables and all the columns and all the foreign keys. And then I just kind of do this awful kind of join across everything to figure out, which tables are namespaceable and which ones are linked through foreign keys. And then I end up with this, and I'm filtering on it at the moment. So that's kind of all the tables. And so a lot of them are kind of one relationship away from a namespace table. But then, and that's not to say that those won't be difficult to do, but the most difficult ones possibly will be these ones. These are the ones that, like, you know, and the one that we always use is to-dos and users. And so, you know, that's something to think about. And then more recently, in the last few minutes, I just started looking at sort of relationships between something that's namespace scoped, so that would fit easily in a shard, and then a user. And there's about, I think we have 55 relationships from things that would be namespace scoped to users that are not. So that's effectively many-to-many relationships that we would need to denormalize in some way with the namespace sharding solution. And each one of those would need consideration. You know, they wouldn't be trivial. But then also inside the, you know, that's not to say that inside a namespace scope, you wouldn't have other problems. So, you know, if a project references another project, say in a fork network, there's no guarantee that those will be on the same shard. And so that would be something that we need to consider as well. So it's just kind of a brute force attack on our database.
Andrew, that's a quick for my own curiosity. So for this table, not you know, not namespaceable, we have to duplicate or replicate the data to all shards. But for the other problems that somewhat we can shard based on namespace, but data may reside on different shards, then the solution will be ultimately, I mean, put it in a simple way, is we have to do the distributed join of the shards to pull all the data from all shards together, so we can get an accurate view of the, accurate result from the query.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in Postgres, so I don't know the details of that, but like, that's what I want to, like, I want to kind of see like a proper proposal of like how we do that, you know, how we deal with transactions across those disparate shards, you know, and all the other questions, like you know, how we actually construct those foreign data wrappers, and, you know, all of that work. Yeah, and that's not to say that it's, yeah, I just personally, I'm finding it difficult to kind of visualize it at the moment. But you know, I'm not an expert in this stuff at all.
Yeah, I would say that it goes along these lines, right? So not all tables need to be shared. Actually, I would correlate this information, which I believe is very useful, with table size, both irrespective if it's number of rows or bytes, right? And then shard those tables that are AC shard because they're namespace based or namespace related, as you well put. And then consider the rest of them that are potentially to be replicated tables, similarly to what Citus was doing or is doing, and consider those replicated. Now, to do those joins across shards, then that's the point where you need to go through the foreign data wrappers. That's where you need to go to a coordinator node, which will hold partitions as foreign tables to the shards. And if you perform the join at this coordinator level, you can express any query as complex as you may want on the coordinator level. Main problem is that will be very slow, especially because given current Postgres implementation of foreign data wrappers, each node is processed serially, not in parallel. That may change in Postgres 13, but that's still true today as of Postgres 12. So one of the goals of this approach would be to try to obviously minimize those kind of queries. Yeah. You still have the option to run those across cross-shard joins, but the less you use that functionality, the better, because otherwise those queries will be hit performance-wise.
Thanks, that's very clear, Alvaro.
And it's perhaps even safe to assume that as soon as you have queries that go across all the shards, if we really talk about 100x scale, and I think this is why we're doing this in the first place, it's safe to assume that they're not only going to be slow, but those features are going to break because you know, you can't be scanning all the shards. And we do have a lot of features that actually do this. I think this is because of GitLab is so cohesive, so it allows you to interact with many things across the instance, across different namespaces and all that.
So,
and it's very.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't think scanning all shards is necessarily that bad a thing, depending on how expensive it is to scan each shard.
That's true, for sure. But we're doing this in the first place because we expect a lot of data growth. And if we assume that we have shards at the size of GitLab Common today, and we have a couple of those, you can't just assume that those features are going to continue to work without any change.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
So anyway, right now, when you drive a query through this coordinator with the foreign data wrappers, since shards are scanned in Syria, right? You cannot expect good performance. This may change in the future. Right now, it will be bad performance. Now, by the time this is, I presume that the initial version will contain a small number of shards, maybe let's say 8 shards, shards. Maybe inside will be partitioned differently, but that doesn't matter. You may have a virtual partitions that are in a greater number, but still you can reference a shard level. So if you have 8 shards, you'll need to scan those in Syria, but it will be only 8. I mean, or if the query, the coordinators may be able to filter, maybe you only need to touch 2 or 3. Yet still, I presume that's going to be slow. By the time you will need 100 physical virtual shards, probably Postgres will have implemented this scanning in parallel. Won't be an issue by that time, I presume.
Yeah, but that could conflict with our adoption model, right? If you're saying 13 could be where they implement parallel scanning, we're not going to adopt that until I think GitLab 15 is the timeline, and that's 2 years from now. So go ahead, Andreas.
And I mean, I really like us that we explore this idea of foreign data wrappers and how to implement that with Postgres. But Alvaro, do you know anybody that has successfully attempted that in production at scale? Or because I don't think we have any examples of anybody doing that actually.
Not really, but conceptually the model is very similar to many other sharding solutions that are in place, right? Citus itself uses the same model, except that instead of using foreign data wrappers, they use a coordinator node. Vitess MySQL lands the same story. It's just a different architecture, but effectively all these designs share the same idea. Now, other production deployments based on this, I don't know of yet.
Yeah, I mean, the idea for sharding, I think this is very similar across all the sharding technologies. But I think that the point here is that in our case, there is no readily available sharding solution for us that we can just use, right? So it's not only about like changing our product to align with that idea, but it's also about implementing that sort of distributed database technology, which seems like a large effort that is that we would pursue if we go down the road, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why we're and I mentioned this within the database team, that we're entering some uncharted territory, right? The size of the dimension is, requires some new solutions. Not all of them are readily available as software that exists. The same happens in other areas like backups, for example, or I/O consumption. But in any case, first of all, yes, we might need to start developing software instead of just consuming it. And I'm talking about database software, in my opinion. I may be wrong, but that's my take. And second, this effort to start understanding how to shard the database, even though this solution may end up coming later, that'll be a good gain anyway, because this is going to happen anytime, right? So the earlier or later, but that will happen. And these patterns, which are ineffective anyway, needs to be fixed at some point and analyzed. So I think anyway, it's going to be heading in the same direction.
In any case, uncharted territory doesn't sound great for a solution that has to be super, proven and stable and, something that has to last and never fail, right? So, yeah, we don't want to test anything new that's going to be brittle or similar.
Right, and we also have a value of boring solutions, right? So picking
Yes.
a solution that we find boring. That's very important for us. So
yeah,
perhaps we can talk a bit about the multi-tenancy solution that we're sort of preparing a proposal for. Would that make sense?
Yep, that's a nice segue, Andreas. Well played.
Well, as a DBA, I always choose the boring solutions too. It's just there aren't in this case.
So to kind of preface it, a lot of this work, and I always refer to it as issue 50. So the research that Andreas and Andrew have done into what's easily shardable and what's not has led to a lot of conversations about how we would need to change the application, which is now listed under follow-up items we need to discuss with product if we are pursuing namespacing sharding as the solution. There are a lot of application changes that would come into play that we would need to make, and we need to have those product discussions. And Sid's going to be involved starting next week, so we can get the ultimate product discussion from him. But while we were discovering those changes and lack of shardability on namespaces, Andrew put together some thoughts about sharding using a multi-tenancy approach on GitLab.com. And Andrew, you want to give us the elevator pitch on that one? It's the last bullet here on what's happening next.
Cool. Do you want to open that up, Greg?
Sure.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, really what this is we've kind of been given the constraints of how we want to do this with a single database. And I think that's pretty clear. And then within that, we've been trying to navigate, like, how can we take this and shard it in a way that we can kind of unroll everything? And it's complicated, right? So I think we all agree on that much. And so I was talking to Andreas about it, and I was trying to think, well, if only there was something above a user and a namespace that we could use as a sharding key. And of course there isn't, but one potential option is that we basically create effectively virtual private instances of GitLab, right? So they're all running on the same application, but Acme Corp could come in and sign up, and they could have acmecorp.gitlab.com. And effectively what that is a tenant. And for the namespaceable, the key, basically the key tables in the database, so user, namespace, projects, and all the sort of big ones, we add a sharding key. And GitLab.com will effectively become tenant 1. And on every self-managed instance, they will become the default tenant. And on the self-managed instances, there will never, ever be any other tenants. It'll just be the one tenant. So it's got quite a good, easy story, simple story for self-managed versus GitLab.com. And then on GitLab.com, we can start expanding it out. So you get, customers can create their own virtual tenant, and they could effectively be the admin of that tenant. And that has some advantages. There's obviously a lot of disadvantages, and we should discuss, and be very sort of aggressively think about the strengths and the weaknesses of this approach. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is that the Access group is working on another sort of stream of work called GitLab Spaces. And this could be quite a good proposal for that as well. So it really provides very solid isolation. You know, when you're in your instance and you mention somebody, you only see people in your instance. It's quite tightly bound to that instance, and it's quite difficult to break out. So it was just an idea that came about from trying to battle with the complexities of what we're doing. And I think the advantage of it is that, technically it's quite easy to think through. Like you sort of know where you need to have the keys. It becomes very easy to shard. Obviously, the downsides of it is that we have one very big shard to start with, and that would be the GitLab.com shard that would have everything on it. But one of the things that I found quite interesting was I've been doing a bit of analysis of who uses GitLab.com, particularly from a database point of view, and I took the top 1,000 users on the site, and I categorized, top 1,000 users by the amount of database time that they spend on GitLab. So basically, specifically on databases. And of those top 1,000 users, about 50% of our capacity. So that's about half. And then beyond that, there's obviously a long tail. But browsing through that list, and you can, there's a pie chart. If you open the source, you can see who the customers are. basically they're all private namespaces. A lot of them are free as well, which is, I think, something else that we need to convert a lot of those users, because you'll see some big name brands in there. So if you click on the pie chart, Craig, and you just click open source, you can see who they are. But anyway, sort of the point is that a lot of the users who are using GitLab are kind of these private users, and they would probably fit quite well into a tenant model. Like, they don't really care about what other users are doing. They're using GitLab for their own sort of worldview. They're not kind of sharing merge requests across with other organizations that much. So it might work quite well for them, but obviously it's a very different direction, and it's not really the remit of this working group. So it's a little bit controversial, but technically it would be quite straightforward, and it's something we should discuss, I think. There's my elevator pitch. Bit of a long elevator pitch.
Thank you. Yeah, we're running up on time here, but and I called it out for follow-up items. So getting product management really involved in the discussions about what changes would need to take place for the namespace approach versus what changes would need to take place for this tenant approach. And we can start talking about what the initial iterations would be, and get their feedback on what's more tenable for them. I think that starts next week with Sid. And Josh is off this week too, which is why he's not in here.
In prep for that, those 88 tables, does it make sense to try to figure out how those map as far as either teams or product features or some mapping associated with them? Like, I was trying to get some intuition about them when I was looking through, in regards to, like, if emojis isn't going to give me all the data based on which shard you're in, I think I can deal with that as a customer, just hypothetically speaking. But there may be others that are like we have to be explicit about, and like that's what I'm trying to figure out is like what's the communication of the customer in those situations, or is it that we tell customers, well, you got to now start using namespaces, and namespaces are by default, as an example, like. At least that's kind of where my current head is at, but I don't know if that's like where anybody else's head is at, or if we're sold on the tenant idea. Lots of quietness, so I'm guessing I'm asking either very deep or way out in left field questions.
The one point I wanted to make was that this tenant proposal is kind of very left field, and so I don't want to kind of have it as a competitor to the other idea, and I think we should kind of all sort of agree on one solution in this working group. But because that idea is so left field, it would be good before we spend too much time on it and come up with this grand plan and then have it shot down by product and by Sid. I think it'd be really good just to kind of feel the water and get an idea of whether it's worth doing that, or just scrap it and just focus on this. So I'm not answering your question at all, but
no, I think you're getting to what I'm after, which is like, I didn't want to say this because this is another kind of right field to your left field, which is why can't we take the tenant and push it into the namespace, right? Like, why can't we just say, by definition, if you're a tenant, you get a namespace, and therefore then everything kind of sequences from there, right? And that sounds, I know that probably sounds crazy, but like that's how you get isolation, right? Is like you tell customers, like, look, this is the way you get isolation, and you're kind of being very upfront about it. And then that does mean that they can't get to some information, but that's where that's the trade-off that they're making in those situations, right? And we're also helping them make, right, for them. So like, I don't think it's actually a bad way to think about it. I think actually, I'd be curious to see what product's reaction is, to be honest. But I agree, we need to work as a team, not having competing proposals, but just like more if we vetted those proposals to make sure we understand the problem.
And thanks for bringing this proposal forward, Andrew. It was supported by data and the struggles that we've had with namespace so far. That being said, we're out of time. If there are any other comments or questions, you can feel free to add them to that doc or this doc, and we will follow up. Thanks, everybody. Happy Tuesday.